Shri Rajnath Singh, Honorable Defence Minister of India, Honorable Defence Minister of Maldives, Mrs. Maria Didi, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. At the outset, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Honorable Raksha Mantri and the Defence Minister of Maldives for gracing the seminar. May I also formally welcome the international delegates, speakers, and moderators who are joining us today. Thank you so much. Special gratitude to participants who are joining us physically despite the challenges associated with COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, in the forenoon, we had an engaging and enriching set of deliberations during the IOR conclave, where perspectives from policymakers from the Indian Ocean region littorals on the shared challenges and shared opportunities for defense cooperation were discussed. Having heard these perspectives, I think it's rightly the turn of scholars and practitioners amongst us to put forth their views on some of the issues we face, on how we can surmount the challenges that collectively confront us in the Indian Ocean region. As is often said, and I quote, "No problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking," unquote. And therefore, time now is to turn to the thinkers amongst us. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Honorable Prime Minister of India had alluded, the fact remains that we in the Indian Ocean region not only enjoy shared geography, but also a shared destiny. And therefore, the incentive to cooperate and to channelize the potential of this region into prosperity for each of our nations and the region at large. From the time the Honorable Prime Minister of India introduced the concept of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, the Indian Navy has been working to fully actualize this vision in the maritime domain in a manner that is beneficial to one and all in the region. One such way we think is to harness the capabilities of each of the IOR littoral in the maritime domain. And therefore, we have chosen this topic that we deliberate today, and I think it will resonate and appeal to all of us as IOR littorals. And that is the idea of collective maritime competence with a view to engender and assure security and growth for all in the region. So I'll just make a small introduction to this topic by addressing three components: the what, the why, and how of the idea of collective maritime competence. So what really is collective maritime competence? And I would describe it as the ability to collectively promote maritime interests in the global commons by collaborating with like-minded nations to build capacities and deepen linkages. Quite simply, collective maritime competence is a combination of three core ideas: collective, which alludes to a cooperative enterprise; maritime, which encompasses everything connected with and from the seas; and competence, which is a shared professional approach to harnessing the common opportunities and challenges encountered in the maritime domain. The why of collective maritime competence holds relevance for each of us. Let me offer three reasons. First of all, we know that the oceans unite. They do not divide. There are deep interlinkages in the maritime domain. And we have discussed in the morning that when we talk of threats, the drugs, piracy, IUU fishing, climate change, etc., these are all transnational in character. Similarly, when we talk of opportunities, connectivity, trade, resources, blue economy, maritime spatial planning, etc., there are interconnectivities in these elements. So countries in the IOR, therefore, have a core interest in collectively keeping the seas safe and secure to assure the progress and prosperity of our nation and their citizens. Also, the very expanse of the ocean spurs us on to collaborate. No one nation has the resources to address all the challenges and harness all the opportunities that the maritime domain offers. Thus, there is an intrinsic incentive to collaborate and cooperate. And most importantly, each one of us in the littoral brings certain unique capabilities to the table, whether it is resident expertise, experience, information, best practices, technology, geographical location, assets, etc. So we can pool and harness these to tackle challenges together, to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Just to cite a few examples in the Indian Ocean region, nations amongst us have good expertise in construction of small-size craft and FRP and GRP work. Some others have an experience in riverine operations with a vibrant watercraft building culture. Few others have made considerable strides in marine spatial planning to harness the full potential of the blue economy. So collective maritime competence will encourage us to nurture, harness, and synergize these capabilities amongst us in the maritime domain to develop greater resilience and response capability. This is as far as why is concerned. And coming to the how of harnessing collective maritime competence, I think the deliberations this afternoon would shed further light on this. But to share a few thoughts, as a naval practitioner, some ways that I feel that navies could build collective competencies is first to engage frequently and exercise often, to become interoperable. So collective competence can only be put to use in crises if we are interoperable. Another area is information sharing and maritime domain awareness. Information can be pooled at very little cost. So domain awareness will help us, further help us shape the operational response. Also, when we engage and operate together, it helps build trust and friendships, binds us as a community. And we all recognize that trust cannot be surged. It needs patient, committed, long-term engagement, and therefore the value of even conferences such as this. So having addressed the what, why, and how of collective maritime competence, I would like to conclude by saying that in many ways, the future of the Indian Ocean region hinges on cooperative efforts of its littoral nations. Prosperity and security for all in the Indian Ocean region can only be accomplished if the nations set out to achieve it together. Therefore, the concept of security and growth for all in the region remains crucial, since it emphasizes an inclusive and engaged ecosystem for partnership in the maritime domain. And India's emphasis has been on partnering as equals to create an inclusive framework rather than a prohibitive, elitist one. And in this, the Indian Navy truly believes that each one amongst us in the IOR is an equal and critical partner in the business of keeping the seas safe and secure. Thank you very much. I wish this seminar enriching discussions.
Thank you, sir, for setting the stage so eloquently. May I request the Honorable Raksha Mantri of India, Shri Rajnath Singh, to kindly deliver the keynote address.
Defense Minister of Maldives, Excellency Usja Maria Didi, Honorable Defense Minister from our friendly foreign countries attending the seminar, and Chief of Defense Staff, General Bipin Rawat, Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Karambir Singh, senior uninformed personnel from the armed forces of the region, respected delegates from across the region, illustrious personalities from the academia, members of the diplomatic corps, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by expressing my compliments to Department of Defense Production and Indian Navy for organizing this Indian Ocean region theme-based seminar on building collective maritime competence towards security and growth for all in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, ancient Sanskrit script, ekayam balam samajasya, tadbhave sa durlabha, means clearly enunciates that unity is strength of any society, and a society is weak without it. I could not have agreed more with the theme of this seminar, which drives into building collective maritime competence. As the esteemed audience is aware, oceans cover about 70% of the Earth's surface. About 80% of world's population lives within 200 kilometers from the ocean, and about 90% of all international trade travels by sea. The Indian Ocean region forms an important part of the oceanic commons shared by the world. The region has, for a large part of human history, been central to the evolution of societies and has had an everlasting impact on the relations between the littoral nations. Friends, not only has it been the originator of ancient civilizations, it has also been the melting pot of different cultures of the world. India's outlook towards the Indian Ocean region is shaped by our civilizational ethos, which stresses upon the greater good of humanity at large. The ancient Indian concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means the whole world is a family, is so deeply ingrained in our polity and people, both, that it is enshrined at the very entrance of our temple of democracy, the Indian Parliament. The Indian Ocean region has always enjoyed a place of prominence in global strategy. Many extra-regional powers, nations, have established a presence in the region to safeguard their strategic interests and assist Indian Ocean region littorals in overcoming challenges in the meantime in the maritime domain like piracy, maritime terrorism, human trafficking, illegal, underreported, and unregulated fishing, loss of biodiversity, climate change, etc. Friends, 20% of the world's LNG, 80% of oil shipments, half of world's container traffic, and one-third of bulk cargo traffic transit through the region annually, not to mention this region being home to one-third of world's population. I therefore say with utmost earnestness that our region demands maritime governance of the highest order. Since energy and trade are critical in influencing geopolitical strategies, any disruption and the consequent turbulence in smooth flow would have strategic security implications for all of us and the world at large. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indian Ocean region acts as a constant source of resources, particularly in the sectors of fisheries, aquaculture, ocean energy, seabed mining, and minerals. It provides tremendous economic opportunities to develop marine tourism and shipping activities. It is essential to tap the enormous potential of ocean-based blue economy to extend economic growth and prosperity for all countries in the region. Friends, in order to ensure shared growth and prosperity, it is imperative that we build competence in the maritime domain on a collective basis. India, due to its geostrategic location in the Indian Ocean region, maritime character, historical and cultural ties with the littoral states, considers it important to keep the maritime neighborhood safe and secure through unity and togetherness. Against challenges originating from the maritime domain, we believe that in unity lies our strength. In recent years, India has taken a number of initiatives driven by the need for collective growth in the region, which has included our initiatives of Look East policy of the late 90s to the mere recent Act East policy and our maritime initiatives of security and growth for all in the region. All these initiatives have underscored the need for a collective approach to strengthen relations in Indian Ocean region in a mutually supportive and cooperative manner. During my visits and virtual interactions with colleagues from across the region, be it Mozambique, Singapore, Iran, it has been heartening to note that we all face shared concerns in maritime domain. These concerns necessitate that our response must be synchronized and coordinated to accomplish a common goal. I am proud to say that navies have been active in the military diplomacy in the IOR and beyond, as every naval officer or sailor is indeed an ambassador of his country. This is a badge of honor that men and women in whites wear, the pride and elan, and rubbing soldiers with the counterparts from other navies in the region. They forge not only professional bonds, but also strengthen our historical and cultural linkages also. Friends, the four pillars of our naval foreign cooperation, which is capacity building, capacity enhancement, cooperative engagements, and collaborative efforts, have national significance and are set to transform India's reach and capabilities in the near and far regions. Under the aegis of Government of India's Vision Sagar, and also in line with our commitment to build collective maritime competence, we endeavor to assist our maritime neighbors by providing assistance of every kind. It also gives me immense pleasure to state that Indian Navy has worked hard in the Indian Ocean region during natural disasters and also during the testing times of COVID. Mission Sagar initiative executed by the Indian Navy was aimed at providing medical and humanitarian aid, food supplies to our maritime neighbors. Our Navy successfully evacuated about 4,000 Indian nationals from the region under Operation Samudra Setu, undertaken during the COVID-19 pandemic. These missions would not have been a success without the able assistance from our maritime neighbors. Friends, in the field of HADR, it is encouraging to note that the Navy's maritime agencies of the region have been interacting extensively with the IONS working group and other constructs. Swift responses rendered in the aftermath of the cyclones in the Indian Ocean region as a sign of solidarity has been exemplary step to enhance collaborative effort. The prompt action taken along with our Sri Lankan partners to arrest fire on board motor tanker Diamond of Sri Lanka, assistance rendered in concert with our maritime partners in aftermath of the oil spill incident involving motor vessel Wakashio of Mauritius, and search and rescue efforts undertaken of Indonesia to locate missing fishermen were indicative of collective readiness at all times to respond to the unforeseen. In the field of constructive engagement, it is heartening to share that the navies in the region are engaging through staff talks, bilateral and multilateral exercises, and the coordinated patrols. And I think these exercises, which are designed for mutual benefit and increasing interoperability, have been extremely beneficial in addressing issues of maritime terrorism, drug trafficking, gun running, etc. Towards maintaining a safe and secure maritime environment in the Indian Ocean region, the navies, maritime agencies in the region are partnering to develop a comprehensive maritime domain awareness in the Indian Ocean region. I am glad to know that a technical agreement are being signed for sharing of wide-sweeping information amongst friendly countries. Friends, I am convinced that given the support and trust that all navies in the region have built with each other, the future of our maritime neighborhood is bright, notwithstanding the many challenges that are present in the maritime domain. To conclude, I wish the deliberations during this seminar every success and hope that the ideas and thoughts exchanged here would help further the Honorable Prime Minister's vision of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your words of guidance and for positing maritime aspects in the correct perspective, which will aid the seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Raksha Mantri has a prior commitment and will be leaving us now. I request panel 1. Let me introduce panel 1 to you as they come on stage. The moderator is Rear Admiral Sanjay Jaisingh, Commandant, Naval War College, India. The panelists are Major General Abdullah Shamal, Chief of Defense Force, Maldives National Defense Force, Dr. Frederick Grar, who is virtual, non-resident senior fellow, South Asia Program, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Washington, D.C. Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General, National Maritime Foundation, he is virtual. Mr. Raghavan, former Chairman, National Security Advisory Board, he is physically present. And the last panelist is Admiral Ravindra Chandrasiri Vijayagunaratne, former Chief of Defense Staff, Sri Lanka, who is also physically present with us today. With that, I hand over to the moderator. All yours, sir.
Since you already introduced the panel, Excellencies, distinguished guests, my eminent panelists, ladies and gentlemen, we will be looking in the first panel at identifying common maritime security challenges. The stage has been set very well for us from this morning's discussions as well as the address given by the Honorable Raksha Mantri and the Chief of Naval Staff. So I will lead off straight away with asking General Abdullah Shamal, sir, considering the rising instances and concentration of natural disasters in the Indian Ocean region, and the largely nascent HADR capability amongst the IOR littorals, how do you see this effect panning out on regional maritime security in the coming years?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm truly humbled to be a part of this panel. And thank you indeed. It's a great pleasure to be at the Aero India 2021. I thank especially the Honorable Defense Minister, Shri Rajnath Singh, for hosting this truly global and spectacular event. I also express my thanks for inviting me to be a part of this panel, as I stated just now. And I respectfully acknowledge the presence of senior officials and delegates from around the Indian Ocean region. And my personal thanks, and I'm truly honored by the invitation extended to me by the Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Karambir Singh. I've had the pleasure of interacting with the Admiral a few times, and we've intensely discussed about the pressing issues of the Greater Indian Ocean region. Yesterday, after the wonderful air show, I took part in the Chiefs of Air Staff conclave. I sincerely compliment the Ministry of Defense of India and the organizers of this marvelous event, especially given the challenges while maneuvering through the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic. In her remarks today, our Defense Minister, Honorable Al-Ustaza Maria Ahmad-Didi, expressed her sincere gratitude for the Covishield vaccine provided from India. We are truly thankful for the vaccine provided to Maldives by the government of India. I joined the Honorable Minister in thanking the Indian government, especially to the people of India for this generous assistance. Timely and critical assistance such as these clearly highlight the outlook of Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of Sagar. The acronym itself is not only attractive, but the concept itself is reassuring. It's promising, and as well as we very much look forward to see how it can be, as senior officers in uniform, how this concept can be operationalized and implemented within the Greater Indian Ocean region. I think that's the most important duty as most important challenge that we will face, and see how it can be operationalized and implemented. It is progressive, forward-looking, and holistic concept that will bring security, prosperity, and growth to all the states and bind us more closer in fraternal ties of cooperation. Now, specifically coming to the pertinent question that you have asked, the Indian Ocean region is infamous for being the world's hazard belt, and natural and man-made disasters pose significant security challenges. It is also important to note that a lot of disasters in the Indian Ocean region have a maritime dimension to it. Seasonal cyclones, monsoon flooding, and landslides, and seismic events and resulting tsunamis are just few harrowing examples. As an archipelagic and oceanic state, Maldives, similar to other Indian Ocean littorals, consider natural disasters to be a major national security concern. The maritime environment makes up 99.7% of our territory. In other words, 99.7% of our country is water. So that makes Maldives quite unique. Our presence right in the middle of the Indian Ocean region not only has a strategic real estate value, but also Maldives right in the middle of the Indian Ocean region is extremely vulnerable too. Similar to other littorals, our way of life, our economic livelihood, and our economic and foods and security are inextricably linked to the maritime environment. Like today in the morning, as our defense minister was stating that we feed on the bounties of the Indian Ocean region. We are very strongly embedded to the splendors and the environment of the Indian Ocean region. For the littorals of the Indian Ocean region, the ocean is a resource base as well as an ecological habitat, which is interesting in itself. For example, looking at the typical example of Maldives, our economy's mainstay is high-end tourism. There are over 150 resorts, almost 600 guest houses, and more than 100 liveaboard safari boats operating in the Maldives. There are further 50 resorts that are under development. Our tourism is entirely dependent on our maritime ecology and underwater natural beauty. In past natural disasters, such as the 2004 tsunami, a lot of the tourists and support infrastructure such as airports and seaports and harbors suffered significant damage. Talking of tsunami, and when we talk about cooperative structures, how we could have collaborative mechanisms within the broader construct of Sagar, I would like to refer to the Indo-Maldives joint exercise Dosti, which remains as an exemplary construct between it's an age-old, for over 3 decades, now we have conducted this exercise. So when the tsunami struck in 2004, not only the forces, the Coast Guard, Maldivian Coast Guard, and the Indian Coast Guard, and broadly the Indian Navy, we were not only interoperable, but also the officers were known to each other. They had trained together, and they were familiar with each other. So it greatly helped to address the issues and then to control the situation. So I would like to particularly refer to this example of how effective and efficient it was during tsunami, because prior to this, we had conducted joint exercise for quite a long time. And now the exercise is run under a trilateral construct. Sri Lanka is also a part of it. I would like to happily note that. Due to our geography, our population lives close to the coast. The situation is a bit extreme in island nations like the Maldives. No matter where you are on an island, you are never more than 200 meters from a coast. We are indeed blessed to be living in such a tropical and idyllic setting, but we are also equally vulnerable. It does pose very real and present dangers. Our critical infrastructure and services such as power stations, schools, hospitals, not to mention private property, are constantly threatened by coastal flooding, tidal surges, and extreme weather events. We also have a factor in the slow catastrophe of climate change and environmental destruction, which is compounding a lot of the natural and ecological vulnerabilities. I agree with the general premise of the question. The HADR capacity in the region is nascent, and it is a significant maritime security challenge. I also take the capacity to mean the defense and civil defense as well as civilian capability in terms of manpower, equipment, and hardware we have ready to deploy for HADR operations. It also means the national interagency response mechanisms or regional and international frameworks for collective action to respond to disasters. That said, I see it more as an avenue or a golden opportunity for cooperation and collaboration. In the Indian Ocean region, we have a long history of providing timely assistance to one another in such situations, just as I mentioned about the tsunami. I recall with gratitude the assistance from India, especially during the tsunami, as I stated, and then much later with the water crisis, and especially the COVID, the current pandemic we are facing. We need to make collective investments to enhance our national as well as regional maritime HADR capacity. I believe forums such as the IORA, where disaster and risk management is already a thematic area, are extremely useful platforms that can be leveraged. Capacity building, especially in small and environmentally vulnerable states, must be supported and augmented. Our collective response capacity must also be enhanced. In this regard, interoperability is crucial. Our personnel, systems, and equipment must have the capacity to work within a unified framework to respond to natural disasters. I hope I have been able to provide some clarity to the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Shamal. You have, in fact, covered just about every aspect so wonderfully, and you brought home certain solid truths. Once again, 99.7% of Maldives is water. We feed on the bounties of the Indian Ocean. Wonderfully said. I think that's common for all of us across the IOR. Cooperative structures within Sagar like Dosti enabled the response to tsunami 2004, especially the working together in the interoperability that we had. Yet despite all this, we still have nascent HATR capability and capacity, which constitutes a maritime security challenge. Before I move on to the next issue under consideration, may I invite Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General of the NMF, for your quick comments and any add-on views on this pose, sir. Admiral Chauhan.
Thank you very much, Admiral, and thank you so much, General. I echo Admiral S.J. Singh's views about the clarity which you have brought to the topic. I just wanted to add one or two small points. You know, while the IORA is indeed the correct political body in which these issues ought to be discussed, at the end of the day, someone has to actually do the doing. And the doers of that doing can only be maritime forces. Whether those are navies, or they are coast guards, or they are police forces, is largely irrelevant. Wherever jurisdictions of place permit, that particular agency should be the lead in that particular country. In some cases, coast guards have unlimited jurisdiction. In others, they have more limited jurisdictions, and that has to be taken into account. The main point, however, is that the construct in which this particular activity of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief would actually find implementation is correctly the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. And the IONS is indeed the most inclusive of bodies throughout the Indian Ocean region. And this is the body that must actually concentrate upon the creation of not just operational, but legal operational structures that will allow it to seamlessly move from one disaster-prone area or stricken area to another. I think, therefore, there is much to be said for strengthening in every conceivable way the construct of the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. Thank you very much.
For that, you've put it across so well, both of you. Inclusive, cooperative, collective investments, as you said, General Shamal, into capacity building and capability enhancement and joint exercises. With that, as the first poser, I shall move on to Dr. Frederick Gar. Sir, the challenges of insecurity and livelihood ashore and the push for exploiting scarce economic resources at sea have seen illegal migration, human trafficking, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing at sea, poaching of economic resources of other states. How do you see these maritime security challenges affecting the regional development of blue economy and the scope for cooperative growth? Dr. Gar.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the organizer for inviting me to this very eminent gathering. Let me say that I'm quite intimidated. The question that I have today is about the link in maritime security and the development of the Indian Ocean, of the blue economy, in the Indian Ocean. And I think that there is, if somebody could cut his microphone, thank you. On the face, this is a relatively easy question. In reality, this is slightly less so because of a related confusion about the term blue economy. And second, because the blue economy is becoming part of the larger strategic configuration that we see today. I'm aware, just a word about the blue economy. I'm aware that I'm speaking today to professionals of the sea. But I think this is useful to, again, definition of the blue economy, just to set up the concept, but also see the limits of it. Because this is a concept which is often used confused with maritime economy. And the reason why I'm insisting on it sounds theoretically obvious, but it's not that clear because when it comes to the reality, there are a lot of overlap between the concrete activities of it. If we use the terms center of the world, this is essentially an integrated approach to economic development and environmental sustainability that is based on the resources of the ocean. So I know that there are several definitions, but this is overall what it amounts to. And the main point here, the key dimension, is sustainability. But this from the larger maritime economy. I mean, the distinction is not linked to specific activities, it is linked to the governance of these activities. Fishing and IUU fishing are basically the same activity. This is fishing, but one is conducted in a way which ensures that the fish stocks are preserved and therefore the activity can be maintained over the long time. Why is it important? There is, sorry, second aspect of it. Maritime evolution has also evolved in this. Why do I say that? Because it's always played a central role in protecting and developing economic assets and resources used in coastal area and open ocean. But this role has expanded in response to the expanded maritime jurisdiction, coupled with a shift in the nature and extent of maritime threat. In other words, what we're talking about is essentially the protection of the exclusive economic zone where 90% of fishing today takes place and most of the gas and oil exploitation, for example. Another point about the linkage of between maritime security and the blue economy. Two are intimately linked, and the linkage between the two is simultaneous. Piracy off the Somalian coast was the result of overfishing before it became a problem of organized crime, which in turn had significant consequences on the maritime economy at large. And it goes without saying that the depletion of fish stocks has an impact too on illegal migration and human trafficking. So maritime security is on one side an enabler of the blue economy. I mean, we all think of the safeguarding of navigation route, protecting the right of marine resources and activities within claim zone of maritime jurisdiction, but the blue economy itself is a source of economic development and growth to the point that sometimes maritime security is seen as a sector of the blue economy itself, because it does create greater demand for maritime security and therefore greater demand for maritime security capabilities, which in turn is likely to trigger great investment and growth of these capabilities. Now, if we come to the specificity of the Indian Ocean, usually when we look at it, we consider the role of, we consider the blue economy and the role of maritime security through three categories of activities. And of course, how could I say, the blue economy character of each of those categories varies. If we speak of commerce and trade, there is a dimension to it through pollution, through a number of things, but this is not specifically blue economy. That's my first point. If we speak of the extraction of non-living resources, I'm speaking, of course, of oil and gas extraction, future seabed mining operations, maritime renewable energy. This is another problem, which has a blue dimension, but not exclusively a blue economic dimension. If we speak of the harvesting of living resources, and of course mostly fishing, this is again something different, and this time we're strictly in the blue economy consideration. And we could add to that, and this is only a topic of growing importance, the protection of the ecosystem, which is also partly linked of the exploitation of living resources. I mean, all of them do underline a different dimension of maritime security. I mean, commerce and trade, for example, the issue there is maritime crime, and therefore the issue is maritime security as technical mean. That is MDA, that is essentially Coast Guard, customs, and so on and so forth. I mean, the example that everybody has in mind is piracy and the kind of infection that we saw in the mid-2000 when in the Indian Ocean alone, there was a peak of some 300 attacks for the sole years of 2001. And if we look, for example, at the tourism industry, which is directly correlated with the blue economy and compare the situation in the Indian Ocean with other part of the world, the Caribbean and so on, we see that the potential is great, but the actual development is much less, and that certainly has to do with maritime security. Extraction of non-living resources, this again has to do with a different dimension of the security, maritime security. This is, there the fixed nature of the resources and infrastructures mean that question of jurisdiction are important, and the delimitation of the EEZ and the continental shelves are central to that. I mean, we all know the problem that we face in this when we speak, for example, the scattered island, Maya, Tromlin, Diego Garcia, and the Chagos, and whatever side we may take in all those competing claims. I mean, this is a fact that has been so far an inhibitor to greater cooperation in the area. Now, there is, of course, the more directly linked question and directly linked to the topic of this intervention as well, which is the harvesting of living resources. The key there is, of course, fishery, which, of course, involve managing transboundary common property resources and required coordinated and multilateral approaches, but where maritime security plays essentially a constabulary role in addressing threat to the effective management of these resources. This is relevant, and this is particularly relevant of the Indian Ocean because it represents some 16% or more of global catches and a much higher percentage of the world fishermen. Needless to say, how important fisheries are for the livelihood and food security as well of the economies of the littoral and island states. I mean, the previous speaker was of the Maldives. I think that 90% of Maldives' total export come from the sea. I mean, 50% of the Seychelles foreign exchange earning come from the sea as well. And I don't have figure for the international of the Indian Ocean in East or South Africa, but this is also significant. This makes IUU fishing, which is affecting the entire region, certainly a significant threat, not the least because this in the past few years, maritime domain awareness as well as law enforcement capabilities are still, if not weak, at least very insufficient. So the transboundary problem makes de facto maritime security a priority area for regional cooperation, a fact that is de facto recognized by the inscription of IUU fishing in a number of regional and international agreements, as well as organization. This is very high on the agenda of the IOR. This is very high on the agenda of the Indian Ocean Commission. This is part of the Code of Conduct of Djibouti through amendment, and so on and so forth. So there is a recognition that this is affecting the economy and the well-being of the region. Now, is it important? This is a dimension which is probably less spoken about because this is because of the growing connection with the larger strategic and security problem in the Indian Ocean. And here I'm speaking mainly of the growing problem caused or perceived at least through the presence of China. Clearly, nobody is innocent when it comes to IUU fishing, but China is certainly accountable for a substantial part of it in the Indian Ocean. And it's interesting to see that every country, from Iran to South Africa, is complaining about Chinese IUU fishing, irrespective of their political relation with Beijing. And clearly, the mention of Iran and South Africa here was no coincidence. And it is interesting, I mean, it comes through many ways, including through fishing agreements, which are also very often purely a facade to practices which amount to air fishing and reporting vessel size and so on and so forth. But what we also increasingly see in the Indian Ocean, although this is not at the same level than in the South China Sea, is the use of IUU fishing for ulterior motive of a geostrategic nature. I mean, this is something that you can observe if you look at, for example, what's happening in this, the southwest of the Indian Ocean, around the Channel of Mozambique, where IUU fishing is very much part of the positioning of the state, and the real issue being the control of the Channel of Mozambique. It's interesting also to see that the beginning of the closure policy was 2013 when the Polish Large Program subsidy was decided at the same time that BRI was launched. Interestingly, the BRI was articulated around 5 pillars: green development, ocean-based prosperity, maritime security, innovative growth, and collective government, which reflect the principle on which the blue economy is grounded. Now, what does that mean? That we see, a number of legitimate activity, and as legitimate for China as it is for anybody else, being coupled with things which are seen as being threatening. This is why when people speak of the need for effort, this is exactly what we are talking about. And the collaborative effort should make at precisely redefining the relation with the number of countries who do not respect it, because it has consequences for the region, and it does end up as dividing the region and polarizing it. And I will stop on this and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Gar. I think you have covered every aspect of it. Very comprehensive coverage and linkage of maritime economy, environment, development, and security. Aspects of depletion of economic resources leading to instability and insecurity. And what you brought out, the deliberate, sponsored activities of IUU and what that entails to regional security and the responses that we need to develop. Those responses, of course, will go into session 2. And a very linked aspect of this, I had wanted to invite the comments of Admiral Vijay Gunaratne, but I'll ask him to cover it as part of the main poser to you, sir, which is that the Indian Ocean region covers the major seaways, connecting the east and the west, with 80% of the sea trade actually being extra-regional, and the region itself providing 80% of the world's oil trade. With such major dependence of not just this region's prosperity, but the global prosperity on the IOR, how do you see the trajectory of maritime piracy, maritime crimes, including IU fishing and depletion of economic resources, and terrorism, and the effect of this trend on the security of maritime shipping, sea lanes, and trades in the coming years, sir?
Thank you. Let me first of all thank the Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Kanbir Singh, and Chairman of the National Maritime Foundation for inviting me to this seminar. Being in India is always a pleasure. Almost all my military career of 39 years in uniform, out of 39 years, 7 years I spent in India. So I don't think anybody will break that record from Sri Lanka as far as it's concerned. And again, it has been a pleasure to be with my NDC course-mates, General Bipin Rawat and VCNS Vice Admiral Pawar. We were in NDC in 2010, and only regret I had was that the day that General Rawat was appointed as a CDS, I retired in Sri Lanka as a CDS, completing my tenure. So that is the connection that we have. And our connection with Indian Navy is something unique. All of us in Sri Lankan Navy has been trained in India, at least 3 to 4 courses. So our relationship with the Indian Navy is to teacher to student. If we have done well against fighting the terrorism in Sri Lanka, the credit should go to the Indian Navy for putting down the basics properly to our hearts and minds and making us professional officers. So as you know that the student to teacher or to teacher to student, or if I say in Hindi, Guru Shiksha, the relationship is above all relationships. If I come back to the question and to the subject, The history says that this beautiful city of Bangalore, the garden city in the state of Karnataka, very actively participated in Indian Ocean trade in centuries. We remind of the Hyder Ali and the fleets which were there in Karnataka who fought against the Portuguese and Dutch fleets. In Second World War history, the Nazi German Navy chief at that time, Grand Admiral Reeder, wrote a report to Hitler on 13th January 1942. It says, the Japan plans to protect this front of the Indian Ocean by capturing key portion of Ceylon. And she also planned to gain control of the seas in that area by meaning of the superior naval forces. 15 Japanese submarines are to be at the moment operating in the Bay of Bengal, in the waters of Ceylon, and in the straits of both sides of Sumatra and Java. Once the Japanese battleships and the aircraft carriers and the submarines and the Japanese Air Force is based in Ceylon, the Britain will face to resort to heavily escorted convoys if she desired to maintain communication with India and Near East. Plans to strike westward of the Indian Ocean and seize Sri Lanka has been prepared by the staff of the Japanese combined fleet. This was a historical note and amply highlight the importance of Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean. And what Admiral Reeder said, if you change the names of these countries, it is valid even in 79 years after the Second World War. That is why I always say that Sri Lanka and India should be more interaction. More interaction should be in naval forces. Presence of Indian Navy and Indian Coast Guard in our waters is very important. The Colombo Harbor, only deep water harbor in this region, which can take in the mega container carriers or known as triple E ships, ships which are 400 meters in length and more than 15 meters in draft, and which carry more than 18,000 containers, can enter only to Colombo at the moment. 60 to 65% of India's containers transship through Colombo. If I say you're almost 100% of the containers going to US and coming from US has to transship through Colombo. If anything happened to Colombo Harbor, obviously it will drastically impact the Indian imports and exports. Therefore, the Indian footprint in Colombo Harbor is extremely important. The western terminal of Colombo Harbor should be run by an Indian company, and you have the footprint there, and you can control things. Similarly, the development of your own deep water harbor, especially which is coming up in Sanjam, in the Kerala state close to the Srinathpuram, is extremely important. That will reduce the India's dependency on Colombo. If I talk about the security concerns and the challenges in the Indian Ocean, what you have to realize is that the policing this vast ocean by one country is difficult. India has secured support of smaller nations, that is Sri Lanka and Maldives, in a Trilateral Maritime Cooperation Agreement, which we signed in 2009. This agreement, as CDS of Maldives mentioned, has given us to work together in oil spill response, sharing white shipping details, sharing automatic identification system details, and to work in a disaster relief. Operation Dosti or Exercise Dosti is one of this agreement's part. And we should work together to take other island nations in the Indian Ocean, namely Mauritius and Seychelles, also included into this agreement. so that we have 5 nations, 5 smaller nations and India working together. The quick response by the Indian Coast Guard and the Indian Navy during the fire on board motor tanker Blue Diamond, which was mentioned in his speech by the Raksha Mantri, a huge VLCC, very large crude oil carrier, which was carrying more than 70,000 tons of crude oil from Gulf to the Indian Oil Company, IOC, caught fire off Sri Lanka, in the southeast of Sri Lanka. The way the Coast Guard and the way the Indian Coast Guard and Indian Navy work professionally to avoid that major oil spill was required a lot of commendation, even though it was just passed in the newspapers and passed by. And I am here to thank you, sir, and to the DG of the Indian Coast Guard, IG Natarajan, for that work, because it would have been a major oil spill, one of the biggest in the world, which would have completely destroyed the beach resorts and the marine life of south of Sri Lanka. Thank you for that. And these things were capable because we have a written document signed by our leaders to work together in the Indian Ocean. The maritime terrorism, drug trafficking, arms smuggling, maritime piracy, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, human trafficking are normally we talk always. We know that the answers for that. And these will now have become almost traditional threats that from the non-state actors we face out at sea. But there are new threats are emerging and we talk less on them, especially on the cyber security. First, I will try to explain. First one, the container transfer and transshipment details are connected via IT networks. What container to load, what to unload, where to transfer, which ship to be put. If you send your container till from your door, when it is loaded, until it is been unloaded in the door of your friend in US, you can track through the internet. Now, the cyber attack on the Danish global shipping giant, Maersk, in 2017, illustrated what devastation such cyber attack can do for shipping network. Most of the ports utilizing the industrial control systems and supervisory control and data acquisition systems known as SCADA system, which were designed without considering of exposure to the internet. A terrorist sitting in front of a computer in his home or in a wayside coffee shop can develop an attack which can devastate the world of shipping. This we have seen in a smaller way. What is the answer for this? The second one is the security of the undersea cables. We think that our data transmitted by the satellites. No. Almost 99.9% of data, today's data, transmit through the undersea cables. The international companies, countries depend on them. On the places where these undersea cables come out to the land are very important locations. Protecting them is a new security challenge. Now, what is the key to overcome these maritime threats? It is the regional integration. In this regard, Indian Navy and Indian Coast Guard should take the lead, where the smaller nation, island nations like Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles can rally around India to making the Indian Ocean a secure place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Admiral Vijay Gunaratne. Thank you very much. You have indeed given us a very comprehensive overview of the entire range of threats and how we can deal with them. You've highlighted not only the central role of Sri Lanka, but its strategic importance over the last century plus. Totally agree with you, sir. And you brought out how India has high stakes in the development and the success of the ports of Sri Lanka, and the importance not just to these two countries, but the entire region for its interlinked trade and maritime security. And you brought out how the solution is towards increasing regional integration, bringing out that the so-called non-traditional threats of non-state sub-conventional level have now become traditional, and we are dealing with them, and we have to work together, and whatever we have dealt with in the past is because we exercise together, because we have SOPs in place, because, as you have highly emphasized, capability enhancement has been through training. Putting all of these issues together, taking off from what you said about the need for SOPs, the need for laying down norms, the need for establishing how we can help each other, I will move on to a question to, or a poser rather, to Admiral Pradeep Chauhan. Sir, the purpose of international law and norms is to enable a rules-based, equitable order and provide a common, equal framework for all countries to pursue their legitimate maritime interests, as you heard Admiral Vijay Gunaratne speaking about. What risk do you see of an unequal adherence and respect for international law, take into account what Dr. Gar just brought out, especially when it comes to selective application and selective interpretations? And what effect would this have on maritime security in the IOR? Admiral Chauhan.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me also echo the views of everybody else in expressing my great gratitude to Admiral K.V. Singh and to the Honorable Raksha Mantri for organizing the this IOR conference in the face of considerable challenge. Let me address the question that you raised quite squarely and hope that the echoing is not particularly deleterious to my delivery. The necessity of a set of internationally agreed upon rules and norms for the conduct of maritime activity at sea has been accepted for so long that it well predates any Peace of Westphalia of 1648 or anything like that. It is pretty much an absolute necessity and well recognized. And it has historical evidence which is percolating, if not millennia. Now, it is not that we do not have time to go into the development of international maritime law itself, but suffice it to say that contemporary international maritime law has been codified by the United Nations, not only by the signing of the 1982 Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, but perhaps even more so by a host of conventions midwifed by the International Maritime Organization, or the IMO, which is correctly defined as the United Nations at Sea. So the IMO itself was the result of a formally signed and ratified convention in 1948 and came into force, of course, a decade later in 1958. The main point I want to emphasize from where your question sort of is coming is that, almost all countries in the Indian Ocean region, perhaps with the occasional exception of Pakistan, quite similar to the countries of the South China Sea, with perhaps the occasional exception of China, are actually quite happily and responsibly using an accepted set of internationally accepted rules, procedures, processes to sustain maritime activity. Now, I am particularly acutely aware that some diplomats and many, many scholars are greatly tempted, if not actively or actually seduced, by the probability or the possibility of regulating the behavior at sea of states which are deeply disrespectful of UNCLOS and the related conventions under the aegis of the IMO through the pursuit of new constructs. Many of these new constructs draw from the relative success, of course, of the 1972 agreement for the prevention of incidents on and over the high seas, commonly known, of course, as the Ink Sea Agreement, which was concluded between the United States and the erstwhile Soviet Union. So we have many discussions at the military, at the diplomatic level, many debates over instruments such as the 1991 agreement between India and Pakistan on the advance notice of military exercises, on the 1998 agreement of enabling or establishing a consultative mechanism to strengthen military maritime safety, well known to all of us as MMCA. More recently, we've got the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, or the DOC. We've got the 2014 Code for Unplanned Encounters, or QUES. And of course, we've got this ongoing effort to conclude a code of conduct within the South China Sea. Now, a notable feature is that all these endeavors seek to regulate aberrant maritime behavior by one or two countries alone. Now, so therefore, I would like to offer to you and to the panel a different perspective that I want to place for the consideration of the House. And it is one that addresses the fundamental question about what do we mean by a rules-based order in the first place. So the behavior of seagoing entities, whether fishing vessels or pleasure craft or scientific vessels or ships of the mercantile marine or law enforcement vessels, such as the Coast Guard, Customs, Immigration, Police, or naval warships. This behavior is already governed by a series of UN and IMO conventions, each and every one of which have been signed and ratified by the very states that exhibit worrisome, if not aberrant behavior in the maritime domain. For example, we have the 1972 COLREGs, or the Convention of International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea, which governs how vessels at sea are to behave when they are encountering one another. How are they to communicate when they don't wish to or cannot use radio is specified in the IMO's International Code of Signals. Which frequencies are to be used when radio is going to be used is specified in the IMO's or the ITU's radio regulations. Therefore, similarly, we have how are language difficulties to be overcome? Well, we have already got the IMO's issue of standard maritime communication phrases or marine communication phrases, or the SCMP, which was once again adopted in 2001. Now, all countries, all these aberrant nations put together, along with the more law-abiding ones, all have signed, all have ratified, and taken in aggregate, if you add to these the issues of the SOLAS Convention of 1974, the mandatory behavioral norms for ships in terms of environmental interaction by MARPOL, and finally for warships, which are engaged in belligerent actions at sea. Even there, we have an insistence upon the San Remo manual, which updates regularly the London codes of 1909. And as you will gather from this rather long litany of mine, we already have adequate conventions that have been publicly signed, publicly confirmed, publicly ratified, and publicly committed. And yet we have behavioral variation. So if you take this in aggregate, all these internationally accepted rules, processes, procedures, to which all these nations have formally and publicly committed themselves, these in aggregate are indeed what is meant by a rules-based order. So my proposition is that the creation or the sustenance of a rules-based order does not need any further documentation, nor will any additional set of documented commitments provide any guarantee of meaningful change, because you must be able to judge the future behavior of any entity based upon its past behavior. And if in the past you have found that conventions that have been duly ratified by the state are given the go by, then what is it that makes us believe that this will not happen in the future? That means one more commitment of good behavior is unlikely to change anything. And it might not be more than chasing a chimera. And it really runs the very large risk of confusing activity with accomplishment. So there's lots of talk, lots of debate, lots of conferences, lots of toing and froing. So then what are we supposed to do? What should we do to maintain the rules-based order upon which rests the entire legitimacy of our intercourse, whether it is trade-based or otherwise? At sea, I put it to you that the answer might lie now in concerted, cooperative, international pressure by way of deliberate and carefully calibrated military signaling, and this should be coupled with social rather than economic ostracization, and a collective leveraging of the existing legal arbitral mechanisms. This is probably likely to produce the adherence to the rules-based order by those exceptional states, if for no other reason than that nations, sir, just like human beings, nations want to be liked by their peers. And that is the strength of international law. That is the strength of international rules. It is a mistake to think that international law should be applied in the same manner or enforced in the same manner as domestic law. I think I'll stop there, having put, I hope, one or two cats amongst one or two pigeons. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Admiral Chauhan, for that very, very insightful that you've given. In fact, it does go a little contrary to some initiatives that we've been taking in the last few years, and it does bring to question, are we barking up the wrong tree? As you brought out, there is no paucity of rules. There is no paucity of adherence to rules. There's an overwhelming evidence of all countries having signed up and agreed to what constitutes good behavior at sea over decades and centuries. And almost everyone has been adhering to it. So you're bringing out a very valid query. Why fix something that is not broken? Perhaps it is giving an excuse to non-adherence by some who do not wish to adhere to it for whatever reason. And that becomes the larger cause of instability and insecurity. You brought home that while rules do and should evolve, this should never become an excuse to not follow existing perfectly good rules and laws. The need is not for more rules, but for fuller and greater observance and adherence through a concerted, cooperative, collective, and calibrated action. Admiral Chauhan, as always, thank you so much for those insights. It leads perfectly into the query that I wanted to ask from Ambassador Raghavan. With his lifetime of diplomacy and also as heading the National Security Advisory Board, so the vision for Sagar, the vision for security and growth for all in the region, is predicated on regional countries working together in a cooperative framework. Now, what challenges do you see to developing this maritime security cooperation in the IOR in the light of all that you've heard, including the esteemed panel's views? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the Indian Navy and Admiral Karambir Singh and, of course, the NMF for inviting me to this very interesting hybrid conference of the real and the physical and the virtual. It's a very good idea. To leap straight into the subject that you've raised in terms of challenges to, let's say, to realizing the vision of Sagar. I want to focus on a few, strike out on a slightly different path from some of the speakers before and focus on a few strategic challenges. Since I think you've set a time limit of 5 minutes, so I'll try to identify 5 challenges.
Thank you.
The first is, and I want to talk about actually the challenges to the second A in Sagar, which is security and growth for all in the region. How do we, where are the challenges to that? Now, Sagar itself recognizes the link between security and growth. And it's obvious that you need security to promote growth. It's also obvious that equitable growth promotes security. So the idea is, how do we do this? And the challenge here, the first challenge here, is that countries in the region have differing perceptions of what is equal security and what is equitable growth. Second is a point actually that Admiral Chauhan has actually dwelt on at length. You need an equitable rule-based order. The legislative framework exists. There are a number of rules, if you like, that exist which have theoretical acceptance. How do you ensure compliance with such a rules-based order? And how do you get different parts of this region to accept that there is compliance? Another major issue. The third challenge, of course, when you talk about the IOR, you're talking about a very diverse region. It's a region that stretches from the east coast of Africa to, well beyond the Straits of Malacca, let us say. Now, to the east of us, we have these various Indo-Pacific initiatives. You have the Quad, which is one, which got a lot of publicity. And what do? They're trying to see whether you can establish a security equilibrium in the region. And if you want to be grander, then you talk about an Indo-Pacific security architecture. But the point is, even each of the 4 Quad countries has differing ideas about what is the elements of the security architecture, and even more different ideas, differing ideas on the pathways to reach there. Then you come further up. In India's Act East policy, we are trying, which the RM mentioned as well, we are trying to see various other templates for maritime cooperation. You have, of course, our relations with ASEAN, you have the PIMSTEC, you have bilateral relationships with countries of ASEAN like Vietnam and Indonesia, a variety of approaches. And then further up, recently we had this meeting of Maldives and Sri Lanka to talk about how we can promote maritime cooperation in the western part of the Indian Ocean mainly. I think eventually Mauritius and Seychelles should come into that as well. So the point is that we have a number of different templates which we need to use in order to promote this. The Admiral mentioned the regional cooperation. The point is to see how we can tie in all this regional cooperation into a larger framework. The fourth challenge, and this has not been talked about, I think Admiral Chauhan perhaps mentioned it briefly, is to find the right military balance in the region. You know, if you look to the east of us, the entire security architecture has been built on a Cold War construct. It is an American security umbrella over the region against a Soviet threat. The Soviet threat doesn't exist anymore. Instead, you have a strong China. You also have a strong Russia-China strategic alliance in the making or already made, depending on whom you listen to. You need to find, if you need an equilibrium, I think you need military strength from within the region, instead of depending on extra-regional military strength. And that's therefore, of course, the Indian Navy needs to strengthen itself for our own economic and security interests in the region, but also you need to have a military strength of regional powers here if you need to maintain the pressure for a proper security architecture. And I think you can see already that countries like Japan and Australia are stepping up to the plate and are also increasing the defense expenditure. And then, of course, you come to the fifth and final challenge, and that is China and its behavior. I don't think half the number of conferences and seminars and meetings that are taking place around the world on the Indo-Pacific or the Indian Ocean would have taken place if it were not for the rise of China and the manner of its rise and the behavior. And we need to confront that. And I think I don't need to list out the various issues that are there, but how do you create systems, structures, cooperative ventures that will bring China to the negotiating table for a cooperative order? The idea, the various approaches that have been there in the past of trying to confront China or contain China, I don't think they're going to get anywhere because of the dependence of countries on China for its economic cooperation and its dominance of the region. So if we need to confront the issue of China and we need to recognize the fact that there are very different approaches towards China in the region, and how do you reconcile these and how do you bring about a structure by which you can develop, fold China into a cooperative order in the region, regardless of all the other challenges that we have. We have an immediate challenge with China on the border. There's no doubt about that. But if you look at the larger Indian Ocean region and how do we look at, how do we bring security and growth for all in the region, you have to see how China's hegemony in the region can be contained, not contained, I would not like to use the contained, can be prevented by diplomatic pressure and the right level of military balance in the region, as I said. So these are the 5 challenges. I want to end with one overarching geopolitical reality that is there, which is the US-China hostility, particularly which is in the recent US administration, the past US administration, expressed it in terms of a strong military posture, which actually scared a number of countries in the region because of their own connection. They didn't want to have to choose between Russia and, between the US and China. And then you also have the US hostility to Russia, which is driving Russia and China together into a strategic alliance, which cannot be a conducive element for a cooperative Indo-Pacific security architecture. So the US-China-Russia configuration, I think, has an important impact on what we can do in the Indian Ocean region. I just want to mention that on India's part, the initiative that the Prime Minister took by launching his Act Far East initiative was in fact to try to make Russia look at the Indo-Pacific security architecture not through the prism of China, but as a Pacific power with its own interest in the Indo-Pacific security architecture. So I want to stop here because we'll run out of time, I'm sure. But these are the various issues that we need to confront if we have to see how we can realize the vision of Sagar in the manner in which the Prime Minister outlined it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, sir, for that very wide-ranging and overarching view. Indeed, gentlemen, we have indeed run out of time, but this, you will agree with me that we've had such a vast range of issues that we've examined in a very short period of time, courtesy such eminent panelists. They've brought out the range of challenges exist. These challenges have been there and they're growing. It's only if we ignore them, they'll become big. But basically, the IOR is a benign sea, just as its littoral is benign and friendly. We have a friendly maritime environment in littoral in which just about everybody adheres to the norms and the laws. We have good enough integration. We have recognition that there is strong interlinking and integration of our economies, of our well-being, that the good order at sea is required by all of us. And all that we need to do is keep working together, training together, and meeting together. But to develop those competencies in specific areas is what we have a second session for. So before we move on to the second session, I will request our esteemed panelists, just sharp 30 seconds each, sir, your final, any summing up views that you have. General Shamal.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to further echo on the opinions expressed by my fellow colleagues, panelists, Ambassador and the Admiral. Well, I think building collective cooperative maritime security, when we talk about building collective maritime security competencies, it's important, well, within a broader concept of development, growth within the region. We need to look into the challenges that are posed. For example, we are seeing the transnational security threats are becoming more and more pronounced within the Greater Indian Ocean region. Threats that emanate within the Greater IOR region by non-state actors. Rather, I would label as super empowered individuals who may be supporting and backing rogue systems, and as a result, the nexuses that have been created, nexuses such as the terror, crime nexuses, and those elements that support the most of the menaces of the Greater Indian Ocean region, be it IUU, be it illicit trafficking, be it gun running. So all the menaces are supported by these structures. So on one hand, when we talk about having a more rules based systems-based, procedures-based order within the Indian Ocean region. And it was very comforting to learn from in fact, my mentor, Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, that he said that no documents as such are required. It's just a matter of adhering to what we have within the greater Indian Ocean region. It is comforting, absolutely. Well, but still, there is, as the ambassador was initially mentioning, the perceptions within the littorals of the greater Indian Ocean region. Aligning those perceptions, having a common consensus as to how we could realize the visions of the security and collective growth of the greater Indian Ocean. I think that is important. So there are certain mechanisms that are already in place. And we much smaller littorals within the greater Indian Ocean region, we are absolutely clear as to the lead role by the Indian Navy, for example, and then the promptness, the commitment that has been there in case of, and it's not a new thing. For years, for example, I talked about Dosti, I talked about the tsunami incident and the prompt responsibility and the capabilities that have been there. So it is important to further, how we can perhaps see it can be further enhanced. For example, information sharing, strengthening the capacity and enhancing of information fusion centers, and how we could see the overhead imagery or satellite imagery could be further enhanced, shared information. These capacities can be developed and then have a common consensus on the perceptions on building collaborative, collective maritime security structures, and to finally further echo on Admiral's view on regional integration and bringing more smaller littoral labels into the security architecture, I would think bring very important yield to this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Thank you very much. Dr. Ghar, 30 seconds, sir. Final comment.
30 seconds will be enough to say that I do agree with what my co-panelists said, especially Emir Chauhan, when he said that there is no real need for a new rule-based order. The order exists, and the real problem is compliance with this order. Now, this is where there is room for cooperation, and perhaps before cooperation, coordination to build capabilities, because this is the problem we're really in for. But there is a real risk if we don't do that, that what has been essentially nuisance, important nuisance, but nuisance nevertheless, become part of a larger strategic problem. And this is where there is the urgency to act and act fast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Admiral Vijay Gunaratne, sir, final comment.
I always insist the regional integration. Now, even if you see the Sagar growth for the older region, now India's economy strength has been helpful to Sri Lanka to grow because your containers tranship through Colombo. So this is what I think the Honorable Prime Minister of India wants. I think it's very good. Then there will be gratitude towards India by the small nations. And again, especially the Indian Navy and Indian Coast Guard respond in a disaster relief operations, as CDF of Maldives mentioned, is carrying a very important message that our neighbors are the first to come in a case of emergency and last to go after everything is settled. So I think regional integration is the key word, and we should work forward for that.
Thank you. Thank you for that, sir. Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, sir, final comment.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add 2 points. One of them is to do with the echoing of the view that we need to knit the region together. You know, there is no percentage in, in trying to confront an extra-regional interloper directly. What we need to do is, if we knit the region together, if Sagar is actually manifested, there won't be any space, any strategic space available for an external interloper, especially a malevolent one or a suspicious one, to enter. One of the main attributes in this regard, or the main features, I think, is transparency. We need to be transparent and honest in not only our action, but also in our stated intent. And the last point I have is with regard to Russia. I agree with Ambassador Raghavan that Russia is crucial, and it's amazing that what is happening inside Russia is a primacy struggle at the sociological level between perhaps Caucasian Russia centered in Moscow and Pacific Russia centered in Vladivostok. And as Vladivostok starts to drive the rest of Russia, I think that Russia will have to start looking at the Indo-Pacific in a much more holistic and independent manner than only through the Chinese lens as correctly brought up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Admiral. Ambassador Raghavan, last word, sir.
Thank you very much. I will echo once again what the Admiral said about regional integration, the importance of regional integration. But another aspect which actually I wanted to comment on, which I skipped, was the importance of technology. The great importance of technology in both bringing us together and in withstanding efforts to pull us apart, both in both regions. And cybersecurity, he mentioned cybersecurity, and he mentioned one very important aspect of the submarine cables. The submarine cables, which actually carry so much of communications within our region, the need for regional cooperation in order to protect them as a security measure is a very important aspect of, I think, IOR cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of session 1. Join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for their wonderful, enlightened views. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree that this was a very scintillating session. So we'll take a quick tea break for 10 minutes. Panel 2 will start at 1700. I request you to be back in time. Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. Check 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1.
Right? He can go out and come in. No? Right.
May I request the moderator and speakers for second panel to kindly come on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second panel. And can I ask control to put the virtual speakers on screen? Timothy, can you give me a test call? Just speak something.
Afternoon. I hope you can hear me okay.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on to panel 2. The theme is Building Collective Maritime Competence to Overcome Security Challenges. It's my privilege to introduce the moderator, Rear Admiral Sudhir Pillai, Indian Navy retired, former Chief Instructor, Defense Services Staff College, Wellington. In the panelists, we have Admiral Aurangzeb Chaudhary, former Chief of Naval Staff, Bangladesh Navy, physically present. We have Rear Admiral Vipin Kumar Saxena, Indian Navy retired, presently the CMD of GRSC Kolkata, and he is physically present. Among our virtual speakers, we have Jane Chan, Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the Maritime Security Program at RSIS Singapore. And the second virtual speaker is Timothy Walker, Maritime Project Leader and Senior Researcher, Institute for Security Studies, Pretoria. Admiral Pillai, sir, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are all refreshed and ready for a quick session, which will see us winding up this whole seminar. But the focus of this particular panel will be on how do we go about building this collective maritime competence that's been asked for. That is an essential if we have to look at security and growth and go ahead. Now, before I hand over to the panelists, a quick word of introduction of these panelists, though I know Captain Parmar introduced them. But I think we got a very eminent panel here who should be able to put things in perspective. I'm going to straitjacket them a bit and get them to give us certain perspectives from the various regions that they come from. So when you look at this panel, you have a person from deep down south, from the Western Indian Ocean, from South Africa. Then you have another scholar from Singapore. You have one from Bangladesh, former Bangladesh Naval Chief and DG of the Coast Guard. And here we have Admiral Saxena, who's the chairman of the Garden Reach Shipyard. So the aim is that this panel has been put together so that we can bring experiences from across the entire region and take a look at what can we do to build collective maritime competence. Now, before we get on to this, let me talk about the lack of capacity within this entire region. This is something we have to be aware of, and we have to not forget. We can talk all kinds of things, but if there is no capacity among the biggest players in the Indian Ocean region, and even people who come from outside, then there's little that's going to be achieved. So to put this in context, let me give you certain statistics which I put together in 2016. Okay, it may be a little dated, but I think it's still relevant. Now, a survey of Indian Ocean region navies from 2016 reveals that 24 out of the 33 littoral countries that constitute the IOR have less than 10 ships of over 1,000 tons. 24% or 25% of the total shipping over
1,000 tons are from India, Thailand, and Malaysia. So a quarter of all the 1,000-ton plus shipping is from these three countries. Thailand, Malaysia, bi-coastal states with responsibilities not just to handle in the Indian Ocean, but they're also looking at the other side, at the South China Seas and the Western Pacific. Only 4 navies, namely Egypt, India, Thailand, Indonesia, have more than 20 ships of 1,000 tons. So if this is the kind of capacity that exists within the region, while the necessity of building collective maritime competence is coming out loud and clear, how do we go about doing it is what I want to ask these panelists. Right? We have our views. In my way of looking at it, when the call was made by Robert Gates in 2009 at the Shangri-La Dialogue that India must stand up and get counted as a net security provider, I think the request was coming from a nation which could barely handle its own capacities in the region. They wanted India to step out and handle part of the load. And it's not just India, it's all of us who will have to get together and handle the load. I think that is where that phrase net security provider came from. We today have Sagar, absolutely essential, because collectively we have to get our act together. Now with this, I'm going to change the order in which people are going to talk and go deep south. So we will come closer to the region by starting with South Africa, and would invite Timothy Walker to give us a perspective from his part of the region and how he looks at it.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be asked to address you today. Thank you very much, Captain Palmer and Satyam Shekhar for facilitating my engagement as well. I will be brief because I do know that it is the evening there and there is time, but I hope there's a couple of salient points that we can pick up on which will be relevant throughout the Indian Ocean region. When it comes to, particularly from a South African perspective, on what is maritime security, there's a very broad net which is thrown over the entire environment. Many, many threats are gathered up in that as well. There hasn't really been what you might call a good prioritization of what is the key threats and risks which need to be addressed. Now, if you look operationally at what South Africa in particular has been doing in the Mozambique Channel since 2011, it has maintained an intermittent naval presence there in the form of one of its frigates, occasionally some of its offshore patrol vessels, which are almost 40 years old, and occasionally other of its vessels to prevent a southward spread of piracy. Now, this has not necessarily led to or spilled over into broader regional collaboration, which I think was what was intended when it started. Now, to understand why the region hasn't, for instance, joined in with some kind of capacity building or burden sharing, you have to understand some of the maybe unique cultural but also geographical challenges which in particular we down in the Southwest Indian Ocean have to grapple with. We have a very complex maritime political geography, which I know is applicable in many other places too. There are disputed sovereignty areas between, in particular, France and Mozambique and Madagascar and the Comores. This automatically makes collaboration a little difficult. But as the chair kindly noted in his introduction, naval capacity or even maritime security capacity, if it's in the form of a coast guard or civil agency, is not very substantial. It cannot be sustained. It is very territorial water focused as well. So automatically the conversation we have about how can we collaborate to combat transnational common threats, especially those which have external to the region origins, for instance, drug smuggling and drug trafficking, is automatically complicated. Now that's against the backdrop of a focus which I'm sure many are familiar here with, which we often term sea blindness, that kind of paradoxical ambivalence of major decision makers and even the general public to the significance of good order at sea and maritime security. And that's particularly acute in the Southern African region, where you have obviously major cities located inland and a large number of inland countries as well. Now, South Africa has tried to leverage that or emphasize its key gateway role as a means of securing additional funding for its navy within the South African government, but also to promote its role as a good security provider, not just in the region but in general. But that hasn't really been picked up. And a reason for that, I would say, and there are two things, and Given the time, I can return to this if there are questions or points for clarification. The one is in terms of its overwhelming focus still on piracy. Like I say, it's drawn a very wide net over all the kind of security issues in the region, which it could collaborate with its neighbors to fight, but also that its neighboring countries can identify and either request support or draw up a revised collective strategy to address that. Now, that's not occurring, one, because, like I say, the piracy focus has remained very key to this, what's called Operation Copper, the South African Navy's long-term presence in the channel, the northern Mozambique Channel. The other one is the Southern African Development Community itself. Now, this institution is, like I say, traditionally land-focused. During the Cold War, or in the before the end of apartheid in South Africa, you had many conflicts over borders. You had destabilization strategy pursued by apartheid South Africa. This left a huge amount of legacies on land, which are the priority for governments to focus on. Maritime security issues are increasing in their prominence, but they still haven't achieved that institutional hook within the broader regional organization. Now, obviously, that's a challenge that we, the ISS and many other organizations, attempt to raise awareness on the importance. And it's thanks to platforms like today as well that we can explore that in an international setting as well. So I'm really looking forward to the other presentations. But it's not just a military or a maritime security solution. It's very clearly a broad diplomatic challenge which needs to be escalated up the regional agenda. And unfortunately, that's not really been occurring yet. Although, like I say, we have potentially some windows of opportunity. I don't really want to call them windows of opportunity with the situation in Mozambique at the moment, where you have massive offshore gas deposits, which major companies are looking to develop. Now, the loss of coastal security on the adjacent coastal areas over the last couple of years in particular, in the last couple of months especially, is of concern. And as we can see with what's happened in Somalia in the past, if there is enough international consensus to have a patrol or a offshore presence, then you can have that in the area. But whether that be reconciled with building long-term regional institutions which can house and sustain this going forward, that's still up for debate, unfortunately. With that, I'd like to hand you over back to you, Chair. Thank you very much for asking me to address today. And like I say, I look forward to any questions that may come my way afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. I think we'll get back to Mozambique in a little while. I will get the other speakers speaking, but it may interest some of you here to know that India has significant interest in the Mozambique Channel. And what are the security challenges there? How do we meet up? Timothy spoke about, I think, force structuring, how not enough is being done. Not enough is being done to get the diplomatic act together. So we will talk about this as we go along. But keeping with time, I would invite Jane to come on and maybe help us figure out what are your views from Southeast Asia, from Singapore, especially as concerning maritime domain awareness. What is it that you would like to tell us that could help us all as we seek to build collective mechanisms? Yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amra, for the introduction. I hope you can hear me well. A very good day to one and all. Please allow me to first thank the organizers and my friends at the National Maritime Foundation for the kind invitation. This is a real privilege to join this distinguished gathering to share my thoughts and to learn from all of you today. So back to the task at hand, I was asked to share a Southeast Asian experience in dealing with maritime security, and for the purposes of sharing what are some of the challenges we are still grappling with and some lessons learned. Since these are my personal opinion, and more importantly, we are amongst experts, I will start by stating upfront some of the assumptions I'm making. First, there's really no need for me to persuade anyone of the value proposition for greater information sharing and maritime domain awareness in the region. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Information Fusion Center, the IFC in short, based in Singapore at the Changi Command and Control Center. So I don't plan to dwell into the background and genesis of the IFC. Nor will I need to emphasize how its constructive contribution subsequently made it a model to many other similar setups around the world, including the IOR IFC, well hosted by the Indian Navy. Second, we know that regional maritime security depends partly on global development and partly on local ones, specific to Southeast Asia. So as I share a Southeast Asian experience, the emphasis is that we are looking at a very different region, the Indian Ocean being much, much bigger with very different geopolitical contexts. And personally, I'm not one for models. Therefore, while I can share my perspective, I'll leave it to the experts and policymakers amongst us to pick what's most relevant. One last point, I subscribe to the idea that the safety and security of regional waters is important to countries far beyond the Indian Ocean, as it is for those of us in the immediate neighborhood. So given the limited time we have, I will simply raise three broad questions, which I, as an analyst, think about when observing maritime cooperation in Southeast Asia, and hopefully these will be useful in helping us think about the collective approach in maritime cooperation in the Indian Ocean as well. So on to my three questions. First, is there a common vision, common maritime vision in the region and amongst partners? Second, are existing institutions able to handle the evolving maritime challenges? And third, quite simply, can we cooperate? So first, on to a common vision. Many has cast a competitive outlook for maritime Southeast Asia, currently preoccupied with challenges to the traditional freedoms of the seas, arising from jurisdictional disputes about who owns what, about the rights and obligations of coastal states versus the rights and duties of user states, and about the lax observations of agreed principles of law, rules, and regulations. We see nation states forgetting that the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea was a product of a grand bargain, one that was forged through difficult compromises, which we may not achieve again. So in that vision of the region, we can expect very little cooperation and a rather high risk of a fractured regional institution and that of conflict. Conversely, there's also a vision of a cooperative nature, as is propagated in this seminar, reminding us that the success of our nations depends on seaborne trade and the globalized system that it leads to. It acknowledges that this system is under threat, and it's not just because of great power competition. So these threats to maritime security are well known, many of which are already discussed in the earlier panel as well. So that being said, and drawing this back to Southeast Asia, and apart from recognition of just how important maritime security is, in nearly all countries, balancing commitments and resources is getting more and more difficult, not least in times of a global pandemic. So priority matters. On top of that, the question remains whether cooperation in maritime security issues, like maritime domain awareness, which is a common interest, whether or not will it lead to a spillover effect to help alleviate the trust deficit that is much talked about, both within Southeast Asia and also in its relations with major powers, that being arguably one of the leading cause of increased risk of conflict in Southeast Asia. So back to the point of whether we in the region can realistically have a common vision that we are committed to, though we may also want to consider if it is necessary to have that common vision before we can meaningfully talk about a common approach. So this brings me to my second point about cooperation and that of institutions. One key criteria to move towards positive cooperation and engagement is the willingness to be flexible. And one such aspect is to consider various models. Understanding partners' priorities, abilities, and constraints is therefore vital. So the question to this will be, do regional countries understand each other well? Are the institutions that we have flexible and accommodating? Ultimately, are we being inclusive? I think we often have to consider whether certain initiatives ought to be region-wide, i.e. whole of ASEAN, or can a sub-regional approach be adopted? So here in Southeast Asia, you will see different models. So apart from the ASEAN and ASEAN-led platform, there are also minilaterals. So the Malacca Straits Patrol and the Trilateral Cooperative Arrangement in the Sulu Syllabus are two good examples where only the littorals are parties to, and they both have information sharing platforms. Both going on well without any side effect on the broader institutional structure of ASEAN, where the 10 member states don't necessarily have the same level of interest on all issues. I'm of course glossing over the academic debate here on the differences between minilaterals and the much talked about ASEAN minus X approach. So on the other end of the spectrum, we have the IFC here in Singapore, where it is a multinational and multi-agency setup, which by last count has about 100 linkages in 42 countries. Yet it still begs the question, and this leads me to my third and final point, is there a habit to cooperate in Southeast Asia? A simple gauge I use is whether we have a habit of sharing information. Because to me, information sharing is an important element to enhance the value of most, if not all, cooperative mechanisms that we have in mind, and it is imperative to risk management. One of the main aims is transparency, a key element to confidence building. So can we really say that there's a disposition to share in this region that will allow for meaningful cooperation? In my view, there's a diverse range of cultural perspective to be reckoned with, and unfortunately, the need to know principle remains dominant in the region. And we all know that the lack of information sharing could distort what should have been a common maritime picture that in turn may severely curtail our ability to manage and mitigate risk. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying that we can't, as individual countries or within the current existing institutional framework, work together where common interests and common concerns lie. We have, and there are good examples where cooperation led to practical solution. It is when some of these cooperation take on a more idealistic narrative that I raise caution. Sir, I will end my presentation on that note, leaving the most important question on how we can imbue a collective willingness to act to the expert in our midst. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion later.
Thank you, Jane. I think that is a lot of points made there. We'll have to actually sit down and think these things through. But before we get on to the discussions where we can debate some of the aspects raised, I would ask Admiral Aurangzeb from Bangladesh to make his point so that we can get them all together, and then we will have this discussion. Over to you, sir.
May I use the podium, please?
Yes.
Respected Chief of Naval Staff of Indian Navy and senior officials of other friendly navies, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I feel highly honored and privileged to be able to attend this hybrid IOR Seminar 2021. I sincerely thank National Maritime Foundation, the knowledge partner of Indian Navy, for inviting me to this event. As the time is of essence, let me straight away take up the points that I'm going to put up here. Respected audience, I've been asked to talk on BIMSTEC. Maritime safety and security is a prerequisite for stability and growth in the Bay of Bengal region and embraces both South and Southeast Asia. Protecting the prosperity and security of the Bay of Bengal requires that region play an active role in tackling multitude of maritime security challenges, including traditional themes of geopolitics and non-traditional transnational challenges. The transnational nature of maritime security often requires collective and collaborative response. Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, that is BIMSTEC in short, is one such organization formed with the objective to harness shared and accelerated growth through mutual cooperation in areas of common interest in Bay of Bengal. It is a sector-driven organization, started initially with 6 sectors, now expanded to many other sectors. Although a number of regional groupings like Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, BCIM, and Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, India, BBNI partially cover the region, it is BIMSTEC that covers the entire region, providing a framework for regional economic integration. Initially starting with 4, now comprising 7 member states of the Bay of Bengal, constituting a contiguous regional unity. BIMSTEC came into being on 6 June 1997 through the Bangkok Declaration. The BIMSTEC region is home to around 1.67 billion people, making around 22% of the global population, with a combined GDP of 3.71 trillion economy. It provides South Asian countries a conduit for economic cooperation with East Asian countries and a link to the East Asian production networks and value chains. Ladies and gentlemen, maritime security issues vary across countries. Some may prioritize geostrategic issues, while others may emphasize non-traditional challenges. These differences are also apparent in relation to issues of state capacity and economic development, making it difficult for a one-size-fits-all approach to maritime capacity building, and hence require a context-based priority setting tailored to individual states. The progress in building a strong grouping for collective security mechanism has been slow and limited in Bay of Bengal. This may be due to the absence of common or convergent narrative or perspective on political or security matters amongst its littorals. However, because of the evolving nature of the persistent asymmetric and non-traditional maritime threats, there is a growing consensus amongst member nations to synergize and coordinate their maritime assets to enhance capacity to meet emerging challenges, where BIMSTEC can be a very useful platform to address the various maritime challenges of the area. While inaugurating the BIMSTEC Secretariat in Dhaka, Sheikh Hasina, the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh, called it historic and further remarked, let BIMSTEC Secretariat become a hallmark of proud partnership of the 7 member states of Bay of Bengal region. Similarly, Sri Narendra Modi, the Honorable Prime Minister of India, said at the BRICS BIMSTEC Outreach Summit, there are many economic opportunities. We have shared aspirations for growth, development, commerce, and technology. We are united by similar challenges and concerns. It is said that the 2 key functional aspects of BIMSTEC, which are market-driven integration and government-driven integration, are important to seek quick gains to the region. As for market integration, emphasis should be given on trade facilitation via liberal transit, business-friendly customs, transport corridors, etc. As for government-driven integration, it is prudent to focus on a few specific sectoral cooperation projects where there are more convergent and common interest of member nations, especially related to connectivity and people-to-people contact. Now, what to focus on? 4 areas need particular focus as emphasized by the experts. BIMSTEC Secretariat, BIMSTEC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, external partners, and interaction of BIMSTEC network of think tanks with BIMSTEC officials, and I would add maritime security as well. The BIMSTEC Secretariat needs to be empowered like the Asian Secretariat and delegated by member states to play a proactive role in driving the BIMSTEC agenda. The Secretariat is run by a chairman selected in alphabetical order from member states for 2 years tenure. The 4th summit at Kathmandu in August 2018 was an important milestone for BIMSTEC as well as for regional cooperation. It was significant in terms of the structural and institutional direction it provided for deepening regional cooperation in the key sectors. These included security and counter-terrorism, multimodal connectivity, trade and people-to-people relations, environment and disaster management, agriculture and tourism, mountain and blue economy. Terrorism and transnational crimes that continue to pose a great threat to international peace and security came up in discourse vividly in Kathmandu summit. The unanimously adopted declaration said, fight against terrorism should target not only terrorists, terror organizations and networks, but also identify and hold accountable states and non-state entities that encourage, support or finance terrorism, provide sanctuaries to terrorists and terror groups, and falsely extol their virtues. Let me highlight some of the major activities and progress achieved so far that may serve as springboard for further collective and collaborative initiatives under the aegis of BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC Kathmandu Summit held in August 2018 declared that also underlined the importance of multidimensional connectivity, which promotes synergy among connectivity frameworks in the region as a key enabler to economic integration for shared prosperity and also establishment of the BIMSTEC grid interconnection for optimization of using energy. First coastal security workshop for BIMSTEC countries was held at the IFC IOR Gurugram, India in November 2019 and provided a forum for sharing expertise and experience on common areas of concern within the maritime domain. Ports are gateways for imports and exports and are also centers of economic activity. The first ever BIMSTEC conclave of ports was held at Visakhapatnam in November 2019 as well. While providing unhindered sea lanes of communication and economic integration of the region, we have to be mindful about security challenges both at sea and to our coastlines. Cooperation in the security domain has been considered of special salience under BIMSTEC. The meeting of BIMSTEC national security chiefs has been structured as an annual feature that they met thrice in 2017, 18, and 19, and have underscored the importance of recognizing the Bay of Bengal as common security space and agreed to collectively work to deal with challenges. In the last 3 years, close security cooperation has not only continued, but has also diversified, and it now includes maritime security cooperation, cyber security, harnessing emerging space technologies for addressing security challenges, HADR, etc. Under BIMSTEC, cooperation against terrorism has been formalized under a joint working group for counter-terrorism and transnational crime, which has advanced cooperation in the critical areas of intelligence sharing, combating financing of terrorism, drug trafficking, and cooperation on countering radicalization. As seas are the global commons and should be kept safe and secure for all legitimate users, thus ensuring that the larger maritime community benefits from collaborative and inclusive approach. Towards achieving this, it is imperative to develop rule-based framework for all members to mobilize their collaboration. These rules and norms are to be on the basis of consensus of all for a coherent common narrative for facing collectively the security challenges which has been so eloquently articulated by Admiral Karambir Singh. The countries of BIMSTEC are working to translate the SDGs into action plan to ensure access to adequate and nutritious food to end hunger, achieve food security, and promote sustainable agriculture. Opportunities may also be created for achieving the objectives of Decade of Ocean Science of UNESCO that has started from this year, January, through collective cooperation and utilizing specialized maritime educational and research institutions and think tanks towards achieving the SDGs. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, towards harnessing the potentials of collective growth, BIMSTEC has been a remarkable initiative by Bay of Bengal littorals. Although its 23 years long journey may not have registered significant tangible progress, yes, its potential and strategic importance is quite significant, as the approach towards BIMSTEC by the member states indicate its usefulness for regional integration both in South and Southeast Asia. It is also an important component of India's neighborhood first and Act East policy. The opportunities for cooperation are vast due to centuries-old cultural and civilizational links and people-to-people contacts. The efforts of BIMSTEC have marked the beginning of collective competence building and need to be augmented by building of trust, capacity building, information sharing, transfer of technology, creating a maritime-specific apex body, and similar efforts to face challenges of governance like unequal development, food and energy insecurity, poverty eradication, climate change, and the growing extremism and security issues. Therefore, partnership and collaboration in these sectors hold great potential to address the challenges to create a safer, cleaner, and securer Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean at large for our future generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. So that's a perspective from Bangladesh, and he looked at looked at BIMSTEC and the comprehensive security aspects. It's a large, wide canvas that is in there, which you very correctly flagged. But then, as we take this session ahead, let me go back to what the Chief of the Naval Staff asked, or he stated this morning when he addressed us. He says there's no one nation which has all the resources to meet all the challenges. The challenges are plenty. If no nation has all the resources, then how is it that we are going to create a construct that can get going when the need arises? So we will have to closely look at each other's countries, each other's capacities, competencies, And we'll have to build and share these competencies and work on it. When I look at Bangladesh, when I look at various countries in the South Asian region, across the region, I see a lot of competencies within those regions. I look at Sri Lanka. I remember even a small thing like a sail for our sail ship Made, we found some collaboration in Colombo to get it sorted out. You know, the paintwork on Made was collaboration from Singapore. There are tremendous capacities in the shipyards of Bangladesh, which I've had occasion to visit. How do we get an act together? Why? The challenges are plenty. The area to be covered is huge. Can we just look at maybe shipbuilding and ship repair as one focus area and see what can we build on it? For this, we have with us in our panel Admiral Saxena, who is the chairman and managing director of the Garden Reach Shipbuilders and Engineers from Calcutta. So may I ask him to make his presentation and give us his points of view. What are the capacities that exist within? And I know such capacities exist across the larger region. How could we synergize it? Yeah. Over to you, Admiral Saxena.
Very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much, Indian Navy and National Maritime Foundation for arranging this very important and pertinent seminar. And also, it's an honor and privilege to be called to be participant as a panelist for this seminar. Thank you very much, CNS sir, for having me here. Well, as we talk about the building collective maritime competence towards security and growth for all in the region, as Admiral Pillai has brought about with respect to the shipbuilding capacities and capabilities across the country in the IOR region, I would like to focus specifically in the warship building competence and capacities of different regions. When we talk about the Southeast Asian region, we talk about the eastern part of the IOR going towards the west side. But as the theme of Sagar, which aims to develop and strengthen comprehensive maritime competence to tackle the challenges that is being faced by different nations of this region. Before we look at the capacities and competencies of shipbuilding in various countries, we have to look at, and certainly it is all known to all of us, that each country has got their own unique security challenges. And also the regions in which they are, those regional challenges are also there. There are common challenges as well. When we look at the challenges that is being faced by the country, we also, as Admiral CN has brought out, we also must look at what kind of a niche capability each country in the region has, which can be brought to the table and can be looked at so that we can evolve a very comprehensive framework of cooperation and collaboration. It is therefore important to identify, nurture, harness, and synergize these capabilities to develop collective resilience so that the whole is more than sum of its part. Now, while the session one has focused more on the operational construct of the challenges and the solutions and the issues that have been brought out by each panelist, I would, as an industry leader in terms of the warship building, working for the maritime forces of the country, I would like to bring that perspective here as to what makes the nation and the nations across the region capable and powerful. And you all will agree with me, the strong naval shipbuilding has actually determined the fate of the various nations over the years. We have seen it from decades. The countries which have focused to develop, nurture their maritime forces, they have done very well. So from this perspective, I would like to say that what all these important components which must be there with each nation. There are three important pillars amongst all FIC. That's strong design capabilities. Then you should have strong marine infrastructure in terms of dry docks, shipbuilding capabilities. And third and the foremost and most important factor is the industrial ecosystem in the country. What kind of a system, what kind of a capabilities, competence of the various firms and the entire ecosystem is there to sustain and support the warship building in those countries. Having said that, if I see that under these three major pillars, starting from, if I look at the eastern side about Singapore, that they have a good design capabilities. They have produced a number of warships, frigates, the amphibious assault ships, littoral mission vessels, so on and so forth. I'll come to India later. We go towards the west side, we look at the South Africa. South Africa, we have the shipyards, Devon shipyard in Cape Town, which has produced a number of vessels, warships, which has been exported to the countries in the African region. Coming to the closer neighborhood in around Southeast Asia, we have the Bangladesh. We know that they have got the vibrant watercraft building capabilities. They have got the five shipyard with them, and we already have MOU with one of the shipyard, Khulna shipyard, and tomorrow we'll be signing the MOU with another shipyard, Anandi shipyard in Slipways. The aim of us in the region is, aim of us in the India in particular is, when you look at the larger vision of Sagar, is to try to collaborate, cooperate in various forms, in various measures with various neighboring countries in the region. And as a part of these MOUs, we intend to go forward and provide them the support, help, and whatever they require in terms of the design support or in terms of the shipbuilding in those respective shipyards, and also try to provide the know-how, the project management, and whatever training, etc., which is very, very important. We look at the Sri Lanka, as Admiral Pillai has correctly brought out, that the Sri Lanka has a very, I would say, strong FRP and GRP manufacturing capabilities. In fact, they have exported a large number of ships. Indian Navy, I recall, around 7-8 years back, have got 80 FICs from the Sulas Mani Lanka shipyard. So each country in the region has some or other unique capabilities. So therefore, looking at the India first, having stated about these three larger nations with regard to what kind of capability in shipbuilding they have. India, as we all know that, in last 5 or 6 decades, Indian Navy in particular, with a visionary approach and a concerted and focused efforts, has transformed itself from the buyer's navy to the builder's navy. The later part of the last century, we have grown in terms of developing the indigenous shipbuilding capabilities. And I would say that here the Navy has really put in a very, very strong focus on the first pillar, that is design competence development, which is very, very critical. And this design directorate of the Indian Navy has produced more than 19 designs of the variety of the class of the ships that has translated into the construction of 90 warships all across in different shipyards of the country, ranging from the aircraft carrier to the destroyer, frigate, the corvettes, and many other ships. Along with this thrust of the Government of India, Indian Navy, the kind of hand-holding they have given, the shipyards have also grown along with them, and these shipyards in the country, some of the leading public and private shipyards, now have the capacity, and they have actually invested considerably in terms of modernizing their facilities to get the modular integrated construction techniques with them. With that, the capacities have really gone up. And to inform you that collectively in last 6 decades, these leading shipyards of the country have constructed more than 275 platforms for the Navy and Indian Coast Guard. So that is the kind of competence and the experience, expertise that has been built within India amongst the shipyard. Another thing is that, as I said, that the capacity building has also been taking place constantly with the Indian shipyards. And as of now, they have the capacity combined to build around 80 ships, small, medium, and large ship, concurrently among those leading shipyards. As of now, Indian Navy has around 40 to 45 odd ships on order among these shipyards, but still they have the capacity. So what I was trying to highlight that the design credential exists here, the capacities with the shipyards exist, and they are further augmenting their capacity to take on more. And the third important pillar, which is so critical, and that certainly is again, I would say, thanks to the Navy's efforts in terms of nurturing, mentoring, and hand-holding a large number of industries, and of course, the great support that is given by the Government of India in recent policy decisions that have been taken. Because of that, the Indian industry, especially in the warship ecosystem, has grown considerably in the stature. When we look at the Tier 1, Tier 2 companies, these companies today are able to produce a state-of-the-art, world-class equipment, be it weapon sensors, communication equipment, EW equipment, fire control systems, or the state-of-the-art IPMS, IBS, and such other things which are being fitted on board ships. You can gauge the competencies of the Indian industry today from the fact that the ships delivered in the recent past to the Indian Navy, that the ASW Corvette program, has got 90% indigenous content. And also the LCU program has got 90% indigenous content. So this is the kind of, I would say, the capabilities and the capacity that has been built within the country. And I said that this is very much, I would say, available. We can go forward as a military industry complex in the IOR region to offer whatever kind of support, whatever kind of collaboration that is possible for the various countries.
Admiral Saxena, may I interrupt? I think you make your point very properly, that there is indeed a lot of capacities here. What I would request is, if we can, sum this up and take this on to figuring out how do we translate this into real operational sharing of competencies. Yeah?
Right, sir. So having said that, I said that the model which you adopted now for the, I would say, with the enormous amount of trust that has been given by the Government of India, looking at the collaboration export, we are looking at the countries in and around the region, and we want to get into the B2B, of course, with the support of the Government of India, and look at the possibilities of transferring the design support to them, and also providing them the complete know-how, and also the various countries in the region, such as, I would say, where the Mauritius, Maldives, Seychelles, etc., where these smaller countries, which has been highlighted by the panelists, that these ships actually, these countries, they require a different kind of platforms, primarily for patrolling operations. So I think that India has actually got huge competence and the capabilities when they have built so many ships. So these kind of vessels at a much more affordable cost, we can provide them, because the kind of equipment which we are able to produce in the country, the platform which we are actually building with our own design, I think we will be in a position to offer a very good solutions which will be very competitive, and because of this equipment being cost effective as compared to the European or American market, we will be in a position to support these countries to give them the vessel as what they need. And finally, I would say that the together, when we look at the maritime competence, when we look at the warship building ecosystem, there's enormous possibilities of cooperation, collaboration, and the time has come that we must move forward to work together and work more deeper between B2B. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Admiral Saxena. I think that lays in perspective the fact that there are tremendous capacities and competencies within this entire region, not just in India, but across Southeast Asia, go right down to South Africa, go across to the Western Indian Ocean also, Eastern Indian Ocean also. But the question again that is in my mind, which is what I want to ask Timothy Walker and Jane from across the seas is, with all these capacities, have we reached a stage where we can effectively undertake maritime security operations. Now, let me be more specific. Let me ask Timothy Walker. When you look at the Mozambique Channel, we know of the threats there. We know of the threats of piracy that came to fore. Terrorism is an issue. There are a lot of security threats around there. But what is the kind of capacities that the South African Development Council brings to that area, and is it adequate? Can there be a larger grouping of forces to help with the kind of issues that are there in the Mozambique Channel? Like I was mentioning, of the large LNG fields that are coming up there, India has a 30% stake among it. Could the Indian Navy itself play a role providing a forward presence and a role in such areas, is what I want to ask Timothy Walker.
Thank you. I'll try and keep my answer brief. One of the major challenges to collaboration within the Southern African Development Community region, two major reasons. One, there is not a high degree of interoperability. And two, not so maybe important for this discussion today, but it also has a substantial Atlantic Ocean board as well, where member states are focused on that particular area. So you don't get a common consensus on what the community itself should be focusing on, but a very split focus. Now, like I say, the interoperability problem is a challenge. The navies in the region do annually meet at what's called the Standing Maritime Committee meeting, which is a part of SADC's overall peace and security architecture. But from the research that I've done into it, it is not a body with a substantial reach into the higher echelons of decision making. So concerns at the more operational level, such as the lack of interoperability between vessels, the lack of a common doctrine or an updated doctrine as well, these have been raised, but they haven't been prioritized yet as well. So I have no doubt that the region's navies, with political will and a political desire amongst the governments to tackle common problems, could bridge or reconcile some of these interoperability problems. But I think one of the key things first is that there is a lack of exercising between and even at the level of just having liaison officers from various countries join in on a South African exercise. I think when it comes to India as well, that the India, Brazil, South Africa organization, IBSA, which has, I think, been overshadowed quite a lot by the success or the prominence of the BRICS organization. But IBSA, with its maritime exercise, has been, I think, a wonderful demonstration of South-South cooperation. Traditionally meeting in South Africa, because with Brazil and India, it's nicely equidistant. And I think that should be a real priority going forward, because with that kind of organization, it could draw in a South-South partner from the Atlantic Ocean. But also, I think it's a great opportunity as a platform for all sorts of observers and liaison officers from the region to meet, to plan together, and also to discuss potential ways of spilling over into other areas of cooperation too. So I like to say, hope that's answered your question. Standing by to clarify if needed as well. Thank you, Admiral.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are running out of time here, but I'm going to wind up with a quick question to Jane from Singapore. You spoke about the maritime domain capacities within your region. You're also aware of what is happening in Gurugram, where the Indian Navy has set up a information fusion center. I'm also aware, and I visited the one in the French Reunion Island, where the French have a similar setup, where they collaborate with Australia. Is there a way, or is there a larger collaboration on information that's happening across the region, or is it all regional?
Well, Admiral, that's a good question, because my understanding, at least from the Information Fusion Center here in Singapore, is that actually all these IFCs that we talk about and that you referred to are in contact and in communication with one another. Maybe it's not formalized in a way that, it's a global network per se, but my understanding is that, the IFC IOR and the IFC in Singapore, talk to each other very often. In fact, the Indian liaison officer that was in Singapore, went back and was part of the team that set up the IFC IOR. Similarly, in the IFC in Madagascar as well, right? The original, the first French liaison officer who was here in Singapore was then, posted to Madagascar. So in a way, they are talking and communicating and sharing information. I think that's the most important thing. The other thing, that I saw that has, kind of brought together the vision that you have is that, they try to model their deliverables and their definition of, specific maritime challenges consistently. So that really helps, in a way for us to building, a better maritime domain awareness in a way that, when we read some of these reports, we know that, we're not referring to different things. Of course, we are still very far away from harmonizing and standardization by way of how IMO is envisioning, how we classify piracy and armed robbery, for example. We are still a distance away from that. But the very fact that these various nodes, right, information sharing nodes across the globe are modeling and learning from one another, I think that is a very huge step forward, towards the vision that you have in mind, sir.
Okay, I think we are out of time. I've loved to have taken a lot, got the audience to ask a lot more questions of this very erudite panel here. But let me wind this up. Now, we have always spoken about how we can, we can actually collaborate with each other and do great things. Let me give you one example of where such collaboration did not take place and a great cost had to be paid. And this example I quote to you is from the Mozambique Channel, where the Royal Navy in the last days east of Suez set up the Beira Patrol, where in pursuit of a UN Security Council resolution, they decided to blockade the port of Beira, from where oil was supposed to go to Rhodesia, which had unilaterally declared its independence. But the Security Council resolution was only for the Royal Navy and not any kind of a collaboration. What resulted? They initially moved in an aircraft carrier, the Ark Royal, into area with its escorts for maritime intercept operations. Wasn't very successful. Ark Royal had to be pulled out for various reasons. HMS Eagle had to be brought across from Singapore for this very operation. This operation started in '66. They just could not maintain the kind of forces that were necessary. The forces continued to dwindle till finally in 1975. After 75 ships had been deployed in the area without being able to enforce the blockade, operation, the Beira Patrol was called off. This is an example of how even for a simple thing like blockading a single port where oil tankers are going in, they had to bring in aircraft carriers. One aircraft carrier wouldn't do. A second aircraft carrier was needed. The Royal Air Force initially could not get permission to operate from then Malagasy, now Madagascar. But after some time, the French gave permissions. The RAF started aiding the air surveillance. That too got withdrawn when Malagasy became a republic. So this tells us a lot of things on how nations will have to cooperate and collaborate at the diplomatic level, at the technical level, at the operational levels. And the big players, in my view, this is my take, this is for the Indian Navy to take away. I think some of us who have larger capacities in the numbers of ships, etc., will have to maintain a forward presence. Your ability to maintain a forward presence deep down in the Indian Ocean is what is being asked for when something like net security provider claim is made. If we indeed have to go and fulfill the requirements of Sagar, I think those kind of capacities will have to be built by India. It will have to be built by the larger players. It will have to be built by everybody, and we will have to collaborate. With this, I will stop this panel. I would finish by thanking of each one of you who's participated from across the entire IOR. I think time hasn't permitted us to get into this in great detail, but there's a lot more in this subject, and we need to keep engaging with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was, I think, a wonderful panel, and we have got a recipe going, but there is much more to do. And this is just the start of the walk we are going for. May I now request Dr. Ajay Kumar, Defense Secretary, Ministry of Defense, India, to kindly give the closing remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Admiral Karambir Singh, Chief of Naval Staff of India, Excellencies present here, and those who are connected with this seminar virtually, delegates, members, eminent speakers, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I have to thank all those of you who are present here, despite the constraints that COVID has put upon all of us. It means a lot for us, especially all our friends who have come from other countries, to be physically present here. And it is your presence that makes this seminar successful. I would like to thank you for your presence here. And at the same time, I would also like to extend my thanks to all the delegates who have joined this seminar on video conferencing and shared their valuable views and inputs. I would also like to thank the distinguished moderators, the panelists who have, through their discussions, enriched all of us on this wonderful and extremely relevant theme, that is building collective maritime competence in the Indian Ocean region. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that the ideas that have come and some of the points that have emerged would have struck a chord amongst all the representative navies who have participated in this seminar. And they will take back some ideas on which we can all collectively work together and see how we can move in this direction. Mahatma Gandhi once said, one must continue to grow and evolve. One must continue to grow and evolve. And as we work with all of you, our aim is how we can collectively continue to grow and evolve. The Defense Minister of India and other speakers have highlighted the geopolitical importance of the Indian Ocean region. We all note that the Indian Ocean region is home to nearly 1/3 of the world's population. And any threat, whether man-made or natural, emanating from within or from adjacent domains, will have an adverse effect on such a large population in the world. It's also very important to note that these issues which plague us are really not limited by the boundaries of these countries. Therefore, navies and other maritime forces of all our countries have the ever-growing responsibility to work with each other. We need to learn from each other's best practices, and this need has become more important than ever before. It is, as I was hearing in the panel earlier, as Admiral Pillai was saying, today, as we work together, there is increasing recognition of the fact that The need for competence needs to come from within and not from outside. We need to build regional competence to deal with the problems that we are facing in this region. And this would be an important takeaway from this seminar. Friends, we in India are working towards this goal of collective growth. We realize that Indian Ocean region is too vast and cannot be monitored by one single maritime force. Therefore, capacity building of extended maritime neighborhood, working through collaboration with maritime neighbors, is something which is top of our priority list. We are happy to share and provide assets and platforms that operate in all three mediums, whether it is air, surface, or underwater. We are happy to provide quality training assistance, and we are happy to work on bilateral and multilateral exercises. Not only this, India is also happy to share with our maritime neighbors our expertise and experiences in areas where we have developed certain competencies. Earlier, Admiral Saxena was talking about shipbuilding. We are happy to share our expertise on shipbuilding with our maritime neighbors. We are happy, and we are today working with several of our countries in the Indian Ocean region through line of credit that we have extended, and we are open to further expanding this collaboration. We are happy to work on information exchange with our maritime neighbors. Today, India has nearly 20 wide shipping agreements in the Indian Ocean region alone. And we invite other countries also to come and join so that the Information Fusion Center at Gurugram is able to share information with all of you with respect to the vessels operating in this region. We are happy to share with you our expertise on hydrography. More than 50% of the countries in the world still do not have hydrographic expertise and data as should be there. We have in this region MOUs with several countries on hydrography, for which we are working with them. We are happy to share this knowledge, expertise, and competence. Today, cyber domain has become one of the biggest challenges that we face in all walks of life. And maritime domain is no exception. India has certain degree of competence in this area, whether it is cyber threats, whether it is bringing down your operations, all of this can be of immense challenge. And we are happy to share our knowledge and competence in the domain of cyber. And last but not the least, in these challenging times of COVID pandemic, we have been working with number of countries, whether it is in terms of medicines, testing, sending medical teams, and now with the vaccines, we are already providing support to several countries with the COVID vaccines. We are happy to share whatever we have learned over this last 1 year with respect to dealing with COVID. It is all this we do with the aim of building collective maritime competence in this region, with the aim of security and growth for all. Our aim, our Prime Minister has said that in all our actions, we follow a policy of neighborhood first. And for all our maritime neighbors, I would like to say, you come before us. And it is with this thought that I would like to once again thank all the moderators, speakers, panelists, and the audience for sparing their valuable time and participating in this seminar and helping it make such a grand success. I would like to thank the Indian Navy for having taken the lead to organize this as part of Aero India 2021. And we look forward to taking these deliberations forward in the coming days offline. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, sir, for your concluding remarks. That gives us a lot of hope also. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this was a well-spent evening. A lot of points on the table we need to look at. And for those of our friends who have a long distance to travel, we wish you safe travel and safe flights. And for all of us, please do stay safe, stay safe. Thank you so much, and have a good day.